There we go. I'm going to welcome everybody again, and I'd like to first throw this over to my colleague, Gwen Whiting, to introduce herself. She's the Curator of History at the State Historical Society, so we'll start there. That's not your title, Gwen. I'm sorry. I was looking at Freya, and I think that's Freya's title at the Mac. I shouldn't have introduced you. I should have just let you introduce yourself, so go for it.
Well, that's close enough. As Allison said, I'm Gwen Whiting. I'm the lead curator at the State Historical Society. I work with collections very intimately. It's obviously, as a curator, it's a significant part of my job. And so one of the things that came to my mind when Allison brought up this concept of COVID collecting is kind of like, why are we doing it? One of the things that I often struggle with when we curate exhibitions that relate more to contemporary topics is that many people don't see themselves as living through history. History is something that happened a long time ago. It's not something that's happening now. And so one of the challenges for us is to have people kind of understand not only that what's happening now is historic, but also that they themselves are important in this story. Because it's very easy for people to kind of dismiss their own roles. You know, I'm not a world leader. I'm not involved in government. I work at a grocery store. Why do you care? When in fact, as historians, I think these are the stories that we struggle with collecting the most. And this has been something that I've observed over time in working with our own collections, is that those are kind of where the gaps in our materials fall. Typically are in people who, for whatever reason, feel that they aren't part of the dominant narrative. And so I'm going to turn it over to Maggie for a minute and then maybe jump back in if that's okay.
Yeah, that's totally fine. Great. Thanks, Gwen. Yeah, Maggie, why don't you jump in and introduce yourself and take it from there?
Okay, thanks, Allison. Hi, everyone. My name is Maggie Weatherby. I am the brand new head of collections for the Washington State Historical Society. I have had one day in the building that I am in charge of. I have had one tour of the collection that I am in charge of. On my first day at the museum and Historical Society, I was told to create a work from home plan for my team because we were starting to work remotely the next day. So it has been an interesting trial by fire as I start working with my team. But one of the things that we started to really discuss internally, as Gwen was saying, was what do we do now? How can we start to collect this moment in history? And especially, how can we make sure that we leave it open and broad enough for people to really engage and feel comfortable? I actually had a conversation with Gwen because my team was getting very detailed. They were like, we only want to ask government officials what they think. So I pulled Gwen in and we had a great discussion about really trying to make sure that whatever program we were going to be doing would be fully accessible to people. And Gwen, whenever you want to take this back, feel free. I'm happy to keep talking, but if you're ready, I'm happy to turn it back over to you. You want me to keep going? Okay, I'll keep going. So internally, we were having this whole discussion about what to collect during this time when we're all going through this moment in history together, especially from home. How do we do this? We were coming up with all these guidelines. And I probably, like many of you, have a really fun, really great moms group on Facebook. And one of my mom friends is a nurse, and she put a letter that her daughter had written at homeschool, right? We're all homeschooling, about how her mom used to be a nurse and now her mom was a hero. And this girl was 8 or 9, I'm trying to remember. I wanted that for the collection. And when I talked about it to my team, they agreed. So we came up with this notion of, let's ask people what they're going through. Let's leave it very open-ended. Let's have an email address that goes to me. It goes directly to me. And let's ask people to share what they're going through. And I have to say, I'm very happy we left it open-ended. We have over 200 submissions. They're coming in daily still. They're everything from essential worker letters to, we had a girl, an 8th grader, whose teacher asked her to send an email because everyone in the class is supposed to send an email about what it's like for them right now. And she was worried that her friends didn't have supportive families. So we're getting, I think the thing to really focus on in what Gwen was saying, we're getting really thoughtful responses. We're getting responses that, like, I feel their weight when I read them and I don't take them lightly. And I think that's something that surprised me. I thought we'd get 300 memes and that's all we get, right? That's what I was sort of expecting. And we're getting memes and they're great. And I mean, they really, really wrap up what our culture is going through right now. But we're really getting super thoughtful, super just make you want to cry submissions. And they make me want to take the project way more seriously than I had initially thought we would be taking it. We're getting a lot of teachers using the project as a writing start for their students. We're getting a lot of teenagers submitting, which is amazing. We weren't expecting that. We're getting essential workers who want to make sure that they're heard too because they're not cops. So it's this really great mix. One of my favorite posts lately, or I should say submissions, sorry, I'm in charge of social media this week, so it's like, it's crazy. You all understand this. We got someone on Vashon is putting bouquets of flowers around with notes on them. And we've gotten one of those as a submission. And it's just this really heartwarming story. The pitfalls that we're having is it's really hard to keep up with it all. It comes to me. I do run submissions sometimes by Gwen, which is really helpful. And I think other pitfalls are other people are not realizing how significant these are. So it's sort of hard for me to make sure everyone understands that these are like special things. These aren't things that we throw up in a gallery on Facebook. Because people are really, really putting so much thought into them, that I think it's important to remember that and to value that and to respect that. People are submitting multiple times. Some people 3 times have submitted, and it's really, really wonderful to see that. Yeah, I mean, I think it's been a really great project in the sense that we have gotten so many more stories that we couldn't have even asked for, things we would have never thought to ask. People who probably would have never thought we were a resource for them have reached out to us. And I really appreciate that. I appreciate that that is the way that submissions are happening. I do also have to say that submissions from healthcare workers are changing because they're having a harder time with patients. It used to be like, I'm a hero, and now there are people who are being berated as hospital workers for wearing PPE because they're, spreading lies, things like that. So I think it's really interesting that it's going on for long enough that we're getting multiple narratives from the same people. So I'm happy to take questions. I'm happy to share more. I've been talking about this forever, so if you feel like I missed something, I apologize.
That's great, Maggie. And definitely questions are starting to pop in, which we'll circle back to the questions after everybody's had a chance to speak. Gwen, was there anything that you wanted to add to what sort of Maggie was talking about, or things that you think are really important to keep in mind?
Yeah, I just wanted to jump back in again. I apologize, like many of you, I have children at home, so they may be a little loud. But one of the things that we've thought about a lot in the context of this project is diversity. And I know that's kind of a buzzword, but we're also thinking, we want to think broadly about the kind of submissions that we get and how we can kind of solicit this information from a broad spectrum of folks, whether that's ethnic diversity, whether that's diversity in age, gender, occupations. One of the things that's really excited me about the submissions that we're seeing is that we're actually getting material from children, which can be very, very hard to get. Another thing that I kind of wanted to comment on is that, you know, we're all very actively collecting on this subject now, but I think it's going to be very important to circle back around to this in a few years after it's been over. And that's because frequently when people submit things to collections with the eye that they will be seen, they are sometimes a little different in tone and in terms of what they are willing to talk about. Like perhaps they may record their experiences in a blog as being more rosy than they actually are. And so I think when we start seeing some of these personal journals and diaries and things around this topic that come to us perhaps in 10 years, they're going to look very different. So I'll posit at that.
Great, thanks, Gwen. And just to kind of jump in, because I got to play a tiny little part in this piece of the process by making a phone call, and that's it. But definitely when Gwen talks about diversity, I know that she and Maggie have also been thinking a lot about sort of diversity of opinion on this experience and how important that is. And so we as an organization, we're sort of struggling with how to maybe appropriately collect some of the material from the protests at the Capitol campus in Olympia. And we kind of struggled with, we didn't feel very comfortable, our director didn't feel comfortable approaching individuals and asking them who had organized and participated in those protests. But she and some of her colleagues recommended that we get in touch with the security office at the Capitol campus and just ask them to collect things that have been left behind. And so they've been keeping posters for us, and they have a little stash of things. And so, you know, that's going to be a very important part of the story that we tell in the future. But a more challenging thing, you know, if people aren't willing to just give them to you, how do you kind of track them down? So cool. I'm going to throw it over to Rachel. Thank you, Gwen and Maggie, so much. So Rachel, there's already some questions popping up about kind of archiving digital materials and stuff. So I know that this is something you have a lot of experience with. So I'm so glad you're here today. So take it away, Rachel.
Hi, I'm Rachel Regelein. I'm the collections manager and registrar for the Log House Museum / Southwest Seattle Historical Society. And very early on during this outbreak, our curator, Tasia Williams, and I knew that we needed to start collecting on this. And we've done previous contemporary collecting at our organization around 9/11 in particular. But we wanted to really do this in a way that would work for our space and capacity. So what we did was we created a really basic Google form where we collect people's names, emails. There's a text space for them to submit a diary entry. And then we have a radio button that's basically serves as a deed of gift so that they know that this is going to the museum's custody. So that's been a really easy, user-friendly resource. We chose to do text only. In part, we'll probably collect some photos and other artifacts later, but with our capacity, with our ability to store and manage particularly born digital artifacts, we wanted to be really selective about what we bring into the collection. Our responses have been really fascinating. Like Gwen and Maggie mentioned, lots of kids and teenagers. That's not something that we anticipated either, but it's been really fascinating. And it's also a concern that we have to, we're in discussion of whether we're going to modify the form to where there's some type of a way to get kind of guardian permission, or if we're just going to circle back afterwards and reach out to the submitters and ask them to have their parent or guardian send permission over. We don't want to discourage this. I mean, getting kid and teen responses is incredible. This will likely be, I mean, for my generation, it was 9/11. This is very much going to be the formative experience for these people. And so many of our oral histories focus on talking to older generations, reflecting back on their childhood, but getting the in the moment perspective is just incredible. and also very heartbreaking. Kids having their birthday in quarantine, missing their friends. To we had one Asian American student who was experiencing racism and having a lot of fear in her life. Back to the diversity issue, we've been fortunate in that we've had responses from all sides of the political spectrum. So we have hope and concern to rage that this is all a conspiracy. So that's kind of been our process right now. In addition to the age issue, one of our challenges has been engagement. We got some really good initial responses, and then it really petered out. Some of our local press shared it. We were also recently featured on a local podcast, but we've been trying to figure out how to kind of rebuild that momentum and get more responses. Yeah, I think that's the main points I wanted to cover.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much, Rachel. So I'm going to start just asking some of the questions that have popped up, and I'll just kind of throw them out generally to our three presenters, and anybody who wants to chime in amongst those three would be great. But I'm going to start with this very exciting news. I heard about this last week, but just kind of speaks to, I think, the incredible spirit and generosity that can come out of a moment like this. So the McCleary Historical Society in McCleary had their utility bill paid by an anonymous do-gooder in their community, and paid the utility bills for all of the businesses in that small town, which is pretty amazing, and definitely feels like something to be documented and remembered. So thanks for sharing that, Linda. I'm so happy for y'all. Okay, so first, I think for both Rachel and maybe Maggie, a question about how you kind of promoted or advertised your projects, and along with that, a kind of secondary question / concern that came up later down the chain is, did you get any pushback that now wasn't really the right time to be collecting, given the kind of seriousness of the moment and the very real life and death impacts that people are feeling? So sort of two parts. A, how did you get the word out? And B, did you get any pushback? Maybe Maggie first.
Sure. We were very fortunate. We started the project not quite as early as Rachel. Rachel's was like on it. Like their project started super early, which is so great. But we were very fortunate. Our press team sent out a press release, and it got picked up by everyone. I did like 2-week press tour. Like that really was how it. And I think a lot of news agencies right now are looking for positive stories. I've done everything from the Kitsap Sun to King 5 News, right? I have done all the different organizations. I've done a whole bunch of podcasts. But in part, I think because they're looking for positive news now. So I do have to say we were fortunate in that way. So we didn't have a problem getting the word out about the project. And actually, I've had quite a few teachers ask me when everything is due, which is so funny and great. And I just keep telling them that, you know, this project, we don't know how long this is going to impact us for, right? So there's no due date, right? People can submit to this as long as they feel like they're experiencing this together. And really, I don't know if we'll have to do another push later, but so far we're still receiving submissions. And if people have individual questions about this, I'm happy for you to email me. There are really a lot of newspapers and radio shows are just really interested in positive things right now. So I'm happy to try to help if you're feeling like you need help in that area. Okay, Allison, sorry, what was the second part of the question?
If you have felt or directly experienced any kind of pushback that now is not the time to be collecting.
Thank you. We haven't, we started very internally with it. And when we really felt that people wanted to share, we were getting submissions before the press picked it up. So one of our first submissions has now submitted 3 times. and he gave us a protest poster. I'm really excited. He's giving us this protest poster. So we have not. I do feel, and I spoke to it a little earlier, that this is a very serious thing as the project continues to go on and people are being very forthcoming with us, and that we need to take that in a very serious manner and not lightly. So it's something that I feel like it's the opposite. I'm reminding my colleagues that it's serious and that we can't take it lightly. So that's been our experience. Allison, did you have?
Yeah, I was just going to say, because I know you and I have talked about this a little bit, that I do think that there's kind of things that need to be separated. There's the collecting, and then there's the sharing of what's been collected.
Exactly.
And I know that, there's some pressure to start. I mean, we've gotten some pretty incredibly moving, touching things, and there are people who want to see that stuff right now. And I know Maggie and our team has been very mindful that, like, that's not the time. Now is not the time for that. That there will be a time, and reminding people of that, I think, has been a key part of your communications internally.
And I think I'm really in the weeds in it, right? Because I'm doing it, and so Allison and Gwen are my sounding board. Like, here, this is super cool. Is it way too political for now, or is this going to be great in 15 years? And they're like, oh, slow your roll. Like, this is going to be great in 15 years. So that's really, really helpful too. And we're happy people submitting things like that, but it's good to remember that it is a stressful time for a lot of people, and we do need to be mindful. So
yeah. How about you, Rachel? How have you kind of gotten the word out, and what kind of response have you had?
Yeah, very similar to Maggie. We tried to leverage our local press. Obviously, we're a much smaller service area, so we have kind of two main news sources on the peninsula. We also regularly share it in our member newsletter. Something that has been really helpful for us too is to cross-post to local Facebook groups that may or may not be historically focused, because this is relevant to everybody right now. We've also, I also just wanted to share one other interesting series of entries that we're getting. We have one local, he's very involved with the organization and local history, but he's been keeping a daily diary and sends us a weekly digest of his accounts. So that's been, it's been really interesting to have, several one-offs, multiple entries, and then some people who are really keeping dedicated logs.
Yeah, they're paying attention to those due dates. Rachel, if you could maybe just, I know that you guys made the decision of sort of just collecting text and digital journal entries based on your capacity to kind of store and maintain a more robust digital collection. Maybe if you and then Maggie could talk about just a little bit about what is involved in storing memes and digital photographs, and what kind of the challenges are, and what people should be thinking about if they're trying to decide if they want to wade into that kind of collecting.
Yeah.
I know that's a huge, that's its own session. We will do a session just on digital collecting, but yeah.
Yeah, no, huge topic. Text is compared to photos and video much easier to collect and maintain. We will probably collect a number of smaller artifacts. We're limited on storage, so we have to be very selective about that. But yeah, honestly, for the most part, physical storage and maintenance is easier than digital storage and maintenance. If you're getting, especially if we've got, a huge dump of digital photos that may or may not be good quality or really representative of what we want to kind of curate and preserve. You need to have all kinds of redundant backups. You need to be running checksums. Otherwise, over time, those image files are going to degrade. And you also have to consider constant migration and monitoring of the hardware that's storing those on those. So a lot more complicated than putting a photo in a sleeve and putting it in an archival asset-free box.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people don't realize that process. Maggie, what are our kind of plans for some of these digital content that we're getting?
We actually we have a digital collection already, again, super new. So it's something I know very small details about. But it was the main concern of my team when we were starting this process, because we didn't know how much digital material we would be receiving. Actually, from our perspective and our projects, and I'm sorry I didn't touch on this before, we're actually getting a lot of people wanting to give us actual artifacts, which again is easier. so we're happy about that. But to reiterate what Rachel said, it is a long-term project to decide what we keep in a digital format, and it's something that our plan in our collections team keeps evolving as we see what's coming in, and how many things we really want to keep. And that's one thing that we're doing. With just our email address, we don't have the luxury that Rachel does of like, click here and you give this to us in perpetuity. Right? We don't have that luxury, which our second big conversation with the team. So we're getting permission from people with the knowledge that we will be doing, wet signature paperwork when mail is allowed back in. And people have been really responsive to that. They're taking this very seriously. So we will be doing all of that as well. But those are sort of our take.
Yeah, and Maggie, that touches on another question that's come up from multiple people. And I'm sure that this is language. I'll ask Rachel if I know that she has it on her Google Doc, but what kind of disclaimer are we using? How is that process working, the kind of legal piece of this? And I think it's a little bit different for the Log House Cabin and us. So.
And I think for part of ours, people are having a conversation with us, which is really, really wonderful. So it's not, here's one email where we're submitting this and we never want to talk to you again. We're finding out more about the individuals. We're finding out what their expectation is with what we can use this for in the future. And we're making sure that we will be able to legally move forward in the future. But it's for us, it's very much a conversation, but that goes to the workload. It's very labor intensive. Our way is super labor intensive. We're getting really great stuff from it and from those conversations, but it's very labor intensive. But we haven't had any pushback about anything so far. I'm being really careful what we share right now. I'm getting specific permission to share right now. But yes, those are our sort of big concerns.
So
yes,
you'll because you're communicating with all of these donors, it's actually a very traditional kind of process where you'll at some point follow up with accession paperwork and things for them to sign. So yeah, and hopefully people kind of understand how that's a little bit different than what Rachel's doing, where like the disclaimer and all of that information is right there as people click to submit. So you definitely might want to consider which of these two models, and there are other models out there for sure, but which of these two models might be doable for you. Maggie and I were talking before we started the session that I think both with me in this program series and some of these and our kids homeschool, we kind of jumped into things without putting a lot of thought into the processes and the systems for sustaining some of this stuff over the course of our stay-at-home quarantine. And so some of this has snowballed, whereas if we just take a time out and kind of think, for me, and I'm speaking for myself, not for Maggie, but next week I'm going to take a time out and figure out a better way to get y'all registered for these programs so that it's not a bunch of emails going back and forth. Those are the kinds of things that...
And it's really important, I think, to think about that, because we've actually thought about going to a model more like Rachel's. So it's one of those where it's a constant, which model is going to work best for us. But the luxury of me being really new is it's something that could just be handed to me, right? I didn't have a million other projects already on my plate.
Yeah.
But I definitely think it's important for people to think about with their work processes.
And so Maggie, just because this is a question that's come up a bunch, and I think everybody's really excited with the material that's being collected from kids and teens. And I know Rachel mentioned a little bit about her plans to kind of follow up with guardians, but that will just be part of your communication process and make sure that parents are involved in that.
It has been. We have only received a few submissions where it wasn't a parent on behalf of their child, which has been very helpful. But it's something we've really had to work on with teachers, making sure that the parents gave permission for us to keep this information that they're sending us. But yeah, it's definitely very much a conversation. And I think that one of the benefits that Gwen and I have talked about of it being a conversation with whole families is that we can make this a time capsule project. So we will build a relationship with the family and then be able to go back and have Gwen in, whatever time period she wants to pass, really work with a family on how they're doing now. Again, super labor intensive for me, but worth it, I think, in the end product we will be able to hand over to our colleagues in 50 to 100 years. So that's sort of how we're thinking about it. I almost daily wish we had a model more like Rachel's.
Yeah.
I remind myself what the product is getting is great.
Yeah, for sure. And I know that some folks have chimed in on the chat group to describe it. I know that there are several smaller historical societies who are really just using Facebook. They're taking pictures around town themselves of signs, of posters, and posting them to Facebook, which then creates its own kind of archive. So there is value in that very kind of simple documenting of this moment too. So yes, there's lots of different models of how to do this. So a question came up, and maybe this is something for Gwen to kind of talk about quickly, sort of where, obviously the State Historical Society has this big statewide collecting project, and how do the sort of regional and local museums fit into that, and their collecting, and how do you see all of that working together, I guess?
Okay, sorry. Well, I think, to be honest, we are collecting on a very broad level, and we try to reach statewide, but that can be hard for us to do. You know your community best. And so, to be quite honest, and at some point when we do an exhibition on this topic, we will probably be reaching out to a number of you and small historical societies to see what stories are really specific to your community. Because in some ways, you know what you can tap in and what will be affected, and what the major events are that have changed or shifted or no longer happening. I see mention of the Bear Festival. I grew up in McClary for a while as a child, so I know instantly what a big deal it would be to have to change that to an online format or cancel it at all. But I wouldn't necessarily know that about another part of the state where I didn't live or grow up. And so I think that you will get a different kind of more personalized buy-in from people who are local to your community. I suspect, although I haven't seen all the submissions, so I don't know this, but I would be willing to bet that a lot of our submissions probably are coming from Tacoma, Pierce County, and the Seattle area. No? Oh, that's great. But I do think there's kind of a difference in what the local historical societies have access to in our collecting. And I think we can all work together to support each other and borrow these materials from each other and access collections. I think that's really, really important, because we can get much more out of a collective effort than necessarily keeping everything, having one group doing all of the collecting.
Yeah, Maggie and Gwen and I have talked about this a lot. There's no competition here for stuff, right? We just want it to be collected, and don't be surprised when Gwen reaches out in 50 years for some anniversary exhibit asking to borrow that poster or that sign or that thing from your town. We're going to be so grateful that you have it. So for sure.
Add on to that. Can I add on really quick?
Yeah,
just one really great thing about all the press that we got to do is I really got to talk with everyone about how every agency that's doing this is important, and how everyone should be collecting in their own communities as well. We're actually, when we're receiving submissions, asking people if they'd also like to really look at their local community too. So it's something we're mindful of, and trying to remind everyone that yes, we're all a team, and that we're not trying to poach anybody's stuff. And if you want to know what we're getting from your area, email me and I will tell you.
Hey, question for you, Rachel, and maybe for Maggie too, but have you got any non-English submissions, any bilingual submissions? And is that something you're specifically kind of soliciting or trying to track down as sort of voices of non-English speaking members of your community?
We haven't yet. I'd love for us to get some, but our website being in English, and to be honest, we don't have great ties to a lot of the non-English speaking parts of our community. That's something that we've been working on, trying to build those relationships, which with COVID has been a struggle to do.
Yeah, for sure. What about us, Maggie? Have we gotten anything?
Sorry, I was on mute. No, we haven't gotten anything that wasn't in English.
Yeah, so there's definitely some work to be done there for sure. Yeah, and okay. Will our entire collection, Maggie and Gwen and Rachel, be available for researchers at some point? Will it be accessible?
I'll go first. We're collecting really broadly, and from our top down, we know that. And we actually have had conversations about who gets to cull this in 100 years, right? Our goal is to collect enough that the key pieces will be there because we don't know what they are. So we definitely are going to be having conversations about making the entire collection available for researchers. But it's something that we're going to have to really think about, because we are going to be collecting so broadly. Gwen, I don't know if you have other thoughts, but those are conversations I've been having with our director. So.
Yeah, I would also add to that frequently when it comes to collections, there's also a concern of privacy on the part of the individual. So I don't think we've run into this yet, but it may be in a couple of years that someone wants to donate a diary, but they don't want it to be accessible during their lifetime, for instance. And so I think that's a concern that we're going to have to think about. I think that will probably come up.
What about you? Is your stuff pretty publicly accessible?
I'm still in conversations with the curator about that. There will likely be a period of some kind of a moratorium before they're fully accessible to everyone. Again, I want to do a little bit more research, particularly into the privacy of child and teen submitters. So yeah, that's an ongoing conversation.
Yeah, great.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead, Gwen.
Can I jump in this one? Yeah, and I would comment that Maggie and I have also had conversations about whether or not we put some of the children's submissions up online before they are of age, just because the concerns of children and privacy on the internet, can be a major issue.
Great. I'm just skimming through the chat to see if there are any questions that I missed. So if you have any questions that you haven't typed in there yet, now is the time. Let's see. I hope that you feel that we've at least touched on most of the questions and concerns that you raised. Oh, yes, thank you. I think that was Shanna reminding me. So are you getting things that you would deem, again, both of you have such open kind of projects, both of us, things that you deem inappropriate, and what kind of criteria are you using to determine whether it's something that you accept or you don't? Yeah, are you getting inappropriate stuff? How about you, Rachel? I think you mentioned in an early conversation that you were getting all kinds of stuff, comments and entries.
Yeah, we haven't received anything that I consider inappropriate or trolling or something that isn't a worthwhile piece of history. Yeah, there's some very differing opinions that I might not personally agree with, but that's my job to document it.
Yeah, for sure. How about you, Maggie? Have we gotten anything just way off the rails?
So our second submission ever was inappropriate, not wildly inappropriate, but inappropriate. But that's really been it. We did have a grandmother try to send us videos of her grandchildren's like homeschooling video blog thing, and she attached the wrong thing. So we got a very accidental, inappropriate But that was really funny.
That was user error, though.
It was actually something I was really thinking was going to be a problem because of my experience at the Japanese American National Museum. I had an outward facing email, and every daily I got inappropriate things. So I was really expecting it to be an issue, and I feel very relieved that it hasn't been. So yes, that's been our experience.
But I'm assuming, and I know because you speak to Gwen and I about all of this, that, there isn't just carte blanche, like you're still there. As things come in, you still are making a determination if there are things that we want in our collection. And
we've been really fortunate that we're getting such thoughtful, wonderful submissions and offers of things that are completely appropriate, which surprised me too. I was really expecting to get lots of random stuff, and we haven't been. And that might change. I don't know. I sort of feel like we have lucked out in the sense that we haven't had to deal with, porn, or we haven't had to deal, right, with things that happen on a regular basis on websites. So I feel very fortunate in that. And we're having a very broad, people from all over the state are sending us submissions, and it's really great. It's a really positive experience for us comparative to what my brain thought it was going to be.
Yeah, that's great. And, as you mentioned, and I'm sure we're all feeling this, and certainly I'm experiencing it in my conversations with all of you 40 organizations who are on this call today, is that our experience of this crisis has changed over the past 9 weeks. Our feelings about it, our, day-to-day challenges, the things that we're worried about are changing. And so I'm sure that that's going to be reflected in the kinds of things that are collected. And I think that's really interesting. Okay, a few more good questions. Questions coming in. Holly over in Puyallup was asking about sort of using and collecting from social media, like comments and discussions, which are certainly valuable and definitely a way that we're all experiencing this moment. So I don't know if you guys have tips on sort of what kind of a protocol would be for capturing and documenting some of those, I guess, really ephemeral kind of social media type things. This might be something I have to do some more digging for some resources, but I don't know, Rachel,
Yeah, collecting from social media is really tricky. It's easy to just kind of screenshot and throw it in your files, but technically, depending on the platform, that the copyright to those actually belongs to the platform now. So there are resources available online. So I'd really, if you're doing that kind of documentation, I really encourage looking into some of the legal implications.
Yeah. Definitely, and I will try to find some more, and maybe Rachel, if you have any kind of articles that you could send me, or blog posts or something that I could share out. Okay, I'm gonna read this question out completely, just so I don't miss anything. So you mentioned memes earlier. If someone submits a meme with their material, how are you going about dealing with it, since so much of modern social media culture centers around memes? Since the person who submitted the meme may not be the creator and it can be difficult to find the original creator of the meme, are you making that distinction, or are you considering it as part of a larger submission? Which I think connects to sort of what Rachel was just, that kind of gray area of who owns this thing. Any other thoughts on that? No.
I can say from our perspective, we're collecting them with the knowledge that we might not be able to keep them, right? After we figure out what, and we've gotten a few people who sent us a lot of memes, which is great, and it's mainly staff that are keeping memes for us. So I think we feel a little bit more like we can research this fully, because Gwen and I have had lots of conversations about how in 50 years will they be able to go back and get permission to use this. So it's something that we're thinking of. And
we are getting some original memes. I'm pretty sure all those Lego memes that you get are like that guy.
Yeah, well, he's calling them a comic strip. So I am differentiating that as a comic strip. It's awesome. It's in 15 years, people will love it. So
kind of a lot right now.
One thing we do need to do some research on this, but there is the possibility that these materials may fall under fair use or under parity, and thus be able to be used in an exhibition context.
Yeah, I think it's a really important question and probably something that there isn't a ton of clarity on right now, but I will definitely try and follow up with some more resources about it. It was a great question. Anne was wondering, oh, and just FYI, Michael shared in the chat box a service that governments sometimes use to capture social media posts, so there might be some information there or something to explore. So Anne was just sort of wondering, and I can't remember if you mentioned it at the beginning, maybe you did, but just Maggie, how many submissions have we gotten? And Rachel, how many submissions have you gotten so far? Maggie?
Okay, I'll go first. We're probably around between 250 and 300 right now. We sometimes get, our largest submission has been 50 things. Our smallest, of course, has been 1. So it's really subjective. So, but it's been a very steady flow for us, and it's more than I was expecting. So we're feeling fortunate. We're feeling fortunate in that.
How about you, Rachel? I can't remember what you said.
Yeah, far fewer. I would say we have, and again, it's similar because some have multiple things. Like we have the one person who's taking a kind of a daily log, between 30 and 50.
Mm-hmm.
We'd like to get those numbers up a lot higher. But like I said, after the initial kind of press release went out, we've had pretty low engagement.
And are you just planning to kind of continue to push that engagement via social media mostly?
Yeah, mostly. We might try and see if our press will do another round, maybe the end of this month or early June.
Yeah, great. Well, I think we've touched on everybody's questions, and if I missed one, I'm going to talk for a few minutes, and you can just remind me in the chat that I forgot your question. But this was really great. I learned a lot, and y'all asked some excellent questions. And again, this recording will be available. I'm also going to ask our presenters if there's anything that they're willing to share with us, any resources or links that they found useful, and I will send out a follow-up email. Just so you know, to try and remember, I was talking about how my system was not really working for me. To simplify my communication system, I have created one long kind of email list of folks who have registered for any of these programs. And so I'm probably going to send out a follow-up email tomorrow that will include both information and details from our Tuesday call about planning to reopen and this conversation. So there might be some information that is irrelevant to you or you don't care about, but just for the ease of communicating, I'll probably just send out one big follow-up email for the week. Also, please join the Facebook group if you haven't already. And I know that Rachel and Maggie and Gwen are available, and so I will include their emails in my follow-up to all of you if you have specific questions you'd like to ask them. I am always available. You all have my email and know how to find me, and so I'm so grateful to you all for engaging in these conversations with me over the past few weeks, and I'm so impressed by how resilient you all are, and I just know you're doing such important work. So thank you. Thanks, Rachel, Gwen, and Maggie, and everybody. Have a good rest of the day. We'll see you soon, I hope. Bye.